So the iPhone 15 Pro released almost a year ago at this point, and one of its key features, at least for creatives, is the ability to record Apple Log, which allows you to film with this phone as you would with a conventional video camera, with no post-processing applied to your footage, with no artificial over-sharpening that's very typical for phone footage, and it will record in an actual proper log format. That's not just a contrast adjustment after the fact, but an actual honest-to-God log with the white paper and everything. You can read it. It's the real deal. Since the release of this phone, I have seen dozens of videos about Apple Log and how to shoot in Apple Log, and they're all fucking doing it wrong. So in this video, I want to explain how to shoot the kind of iPhone footage that can seamlessly intercut with an 8K cinema camera. I'm going to go over the apps you should be using, the settings you want to set, and of course, everyone's favorite topic, additional equipment. Because the reality is that Apple and a lot of YouTubers, to be honest, would have you believe that shooting high-quality iPhone footage is as simple as pointing the camera at the thing you want to shoot, tapping that log button in the camera settings, and pressing record, and you got yourself the Apple event production quality, which is not at all how this works. In reality, it's more of a
lights, camera, action. Get ready for the main attraction. Stevie Wonder shades on at the mansion. Look at how far we come up with a passion.
So let's get into it. First, you want to go to the App Store and you want to download the Blackmagic Camera app. Man, isn't it funny how Blackmagic just kind of became the king? It's like, remember Filmic? Filmic was this app that was like the darling of iPhone video. They were the best. Apple brought them up on stage at multiple points. And then they had a version, whatever, that they released that didn't really add anything new, but forced everyone to get a subscription after people had already paid for the app in the past. And no one did that. And then Blackmagic came out and made an app that does everything Filmic did and more and better. And now Filmic's dead. There's a lesson in there somewhere. But once you've downloaded the app, there's a couple of things we want to do before we get to any shooting. You want to go into settings, you want to go to color space, and you want to select Apple Log HDR. Next, you want to go up to codec, and here I would recommend you choose either HEVC if you're shooting internally, or if you're shooting externally and you want to get maximum latitude out of your footage, choose ProRes 422. I wouldn't recommend HQ because even the beefiest MacBooks will struggle with 422 HQ, and it doesn't really add that much when shooting on an iPhone. As far as storage goes, I use one of these. This is the Samsung T7 1TB SSD. It's been pretty good, pretty reliable. And in order to set it up, you want to scroll down to Media and you want to select Files as a recording option. It will pop up the file browser, and when your SSD is connected with the Type-C cable, it will just show up as an option there. So you want to select the root of your drive or the folder that you want to be recording into, hit save, and the app will know to record to that location. You also want to go down to the shutter measurement option and set it to angles instead of speed, because we're trying to be professional here. And that's the most important stuff done. While you're in the settings, you can load in preview LUTs. You can set your anamorphic desqueeze if you're using anamorphic lenses. You can set your audio source, which make sure that's not disabled if you intend to record audio. It happened to me a couple of times. I lost audio that I would have preferred to record, but life isn't perfect. And now we can move on to the camera view. There's a couple of things here that we want to set, starting with the frame rate. For me, it's 24 frames per second because I usually deliver in 24. Set this to whatever your other cameras are shooting or what your project frame rate is going to be, or 60 if you're shooting slow-mo. Next, you want to move on to ISO and set it to the lowest amount you can get away with without crushing the shadows in your scene. I try to get it as close to 55 as I can if the environment allows it. If it's too dark, you want to go up to about 1200 because at that point the image cleans up a little bit. And if you go down to ISO 55 and your image is still overexposed, it's time for our first piece of additional equipment, the ND filter. You see, the key to shooting high quality iPhone footage is to treat the iPhone like you would a real camera, except you have a fixed aperture lens. So you can't stop it down on the lens. You're stuck with what the phone ships with. So in order to control the light, we're going to have to use ND filters. Now, while we're in the camera view, you might want to select the preferred stabilization mode. Apple offers 3, which Blackmagic uses, which are standard, cinematic, and extreme. I generally just shoot in standard if there's not a lot of movement. I shoot cinematic if there is some light movement or if I need to do some walking. And I don't really use extreme that much unless it's like a high speed action shot or something like that. Because the problem with the extreme stabilization mode is it is very good, but it's basically going to make monitoring impossible because it has to delay the image by over a second. So you can't really frame your shots very well with the stabilization mode enabled. But if you pretty much know what your camera move is going to be and you can do it without looking at the screen, extreme is going to do extremely well. But I generally just keep my stabilization on standard. Also, anything higher than standard will disable a preview LUT if you have a preview LUT enabled. So when you hit record, it's going to show you the log image instead of the graded image. So keep that in mind. The other option to get smooth motion if you need stabilized video is to use one of these things. This is the DJI Osmo, whichever one. I think this is the OM4, which is a gimbal for your phone. The only issue is that you're not going to be able to use active track or the time-lapse features because the Mimo app that the DJI uses to control the gimbal doesn't support Apple Log as of recording this video. So you can still use it for general stabilization and you can use the joystick, but if you want log, you're going to have to be using the Blackmagic app, which means you don't get the advanced gimbal controls. And that brings us neatly along to the accessories, the topic that, as much as I would like to avoid, is really unavoidable because the reality is, just like you need to rig most cameras to perform well, you need to rig the iPhone to perform well. Again, remember, the topic here is to treat the iPhone like you would an actual camera. The first iPhone filmmaking accessory that I got was this anamorphic lens attachment. This is the 155X squeeze from Moment. This one's a gold flare, which shipped with this bag that says blue flare because Moment. Actually, you know what? Let's take a moment to talk about Moment because they deserve a separate segment in a video like this. You see, Moment is a company that makes mobile filmmaking accessories for creators. And they are probably the only company I have encountered that has an aspiration for an ecosystem of products and yet completely fails to ecosystem their products. None of their shit works with their other shit. And let me show you. This is the cage that I'm using, right? This is the Moment MagSafe cage. These are small rig handles. Just ignore the handles for now. But this is a cage. I love the cage. The cage is excellent. You just take your phone. You can snap it into the here, and it's good. It's pretty durable. It stays pretty well. You can run with this thing. It's really good. The problem is, as soon as you start putting additional Moment stuff onto this case, which this is a Moment case, it doesn't really fit. For example, if we take the anamorphic lens that I just mentioned and we put it on the 24mm main lens, which is the one where an anamorphic lens makes the most sense, suddenly it no longer fits the MagSafe very well. Like, it's a little wobbly now because the lens is rubbing up against the MagSafe mount. And you might be thinking that Moment was just lazy and they didn't test it with the iPhone Pro and it only works well if you're using the Pro Max. But no, I actually tested it with the Pro Max and it has basically all of the same issues. Like, it just doesn't fit. But wait, it gets worse. See, if we take out the anamorphic lens from the lens attachment, which by the way is a consumable item, right? According to Moment engineers, they publicly admit that these are essentially going to stop working at some point because they're made out of cheap plastic. So if you have enough twist cycles of these non-plastic lenses, it's just going to grind the attachment down and it's going to be unusable and you're going to have to get new ones, which why is it not made of aluminum? Why is it like, yeah, I get it. It's because they want you to keep buying their stuff, right? But if you just charge me more for the aluminum mount, you can justify bending me over for the same amount of money with the fact that, oh, but at least it's aluminum, it's durable, right? And if you do that, I will only be annoyed once because I have to pay more instead of being annoyed every time I have to change one of these. Anyway, let's talk more about Moment accessories, right? This one here is the Moment filter mount. They sell filters for it. It's a 67mm thread. I just use it with some step-up rings and with an 82 filter because I already have one. The problem is, you see, if I want to take this filter, the universal filter mount, they call it, and I put it on the phone, right? It wraps around the Moment lens mount nicely, but the problem is I can't, the cage doesn't work anymore because it's too fucking big. Like what they could do is just push the actual thread forward so that it lets the MagSafe mount slide in there, but they just didn't. And you might be thinking, well, why don't you just don't use MagSafe? What if you use like a little clamp adapter? Which is a great idea, James, except it defeats the point of the fucking MagSafe cage. So yeah, very unfortunate stuff with Moment. I love the cage, but I just wish that more thought went into the rest of their stuff. I need to check out the Tilta system. Maybe that one's good. There's a new thing that Tilta just made for iPhone shooters. I have not used it. I can't speak to that, but Tilta is generally good with ecosystems, so who knows? So anyway, the equipment that I'm using is the Moment cage, right, with a NATO rail on top for mounting anything, be it a monitor or an external mic or something else. I have two NATO rails on the sides here, which I use to attach these small rig handles. These are like cheap, not super fancy ones, but they do the job pretty well for the phone one. And then normally I would have a cold shoe SSD mount up in this cold shoe, so the cable would route through this cable management thing at the corner of the cage, which it is really good. Like it's a good cage. Right? I just wish everything else was also good. And this would pretty much be my setup. It keeps the phone stable for most of the movement. It adds the weight, it adds the distribution, so you're not holding it kind of awkwardly by the corners of the phone. And this is how I would do most of my Apple log filming. Filter is really the key in all of this. I'm using the Polar Pro Peter McKinnon one because I've had this for years now. It's a good filter. It's a 2 to 5 stops. I never really needed more than 5 stops. And underneath it, I have the 7 Artisans Cheapo 1/8 Pro Mist filter, or just Mist, I guess. It's not very pro. It does what you would expect it to do. It's a mist filter. And the reason I keep it on here is because I want to use the ND filter. Because you see, Moment does make their own, what they call a Cine Bloom, which is basically a Pro Mist, right? They don't want you to call it that because it's sort of different, but it's a Pro Mist. Okay, it just basically does the same. And the problem with this one is if you have it on the Moment case, it snaps to their lens mount, then the universal filter mount doesn't really go on properly. It's just gonna wobble on top of it. Which, but the filter itself is pretty good. If you don't need an ND filter and you want to save some space, I would just use this instead of the universal mount and a screw-on filter. One of the reasons I prefer using a stack of step-up rings versus just a single ring or a 67mm filter is because when you're using an anamorphic lens with it, it actually sort of fits inside of the stack and is going to let you use an ND filter with an anamorphic lens. Now, Moment actually has a clamp mount to use with the anamorphic lens, but I'm not buying any more Moment stuff. And that is my setup. That is everything I use to shoot in Apple Log. I don't always have all of this stuff with me, and sometimes you can get away without, for example, using a filter. Like if you have a slow moving shot of an object on a static surface, right? There's not that much movement. So you can bring the shutter down to like 90 degrees and you're not going to really see any choppiness in the movement. But generally speaking, the rule is to treat the iPhone like you would treat a camera. So don't think of it as an iPhone. Think of it as just another camera in a phone-like body. Now, when it comes to grading, it really is no different from any other camera. You drop it in Resolve, you add a color space transform node, you select the Rec 2020 color space and the Apple log gamma, and you get a Rec 709 clip that you can grade however you normally grade, whether it's just dumping a lot on it or using the balls like a real deal colorist. Honorable mention in all of this is an app called Kino. It's made by the same guys that made the Halide camera app, and it's actually pretty good. It's a very thoughtfully designed app, except for this thing, or the ISO slider is borderline unusable, and I've mentioned it to Sebastian a number of times, and they insist that they will fix that in a larger redesign, but it doesn't matter. The app is still good, and it has a lot of pretty sweet built-in color grades that you can either use as previews or bake into the footage. So if you want to post it straight to your Instagram stories, or if you're working in an environment that is going to look good with one of these grades, you can just slap that on, save yourself some work. But that's it. That is basically how I approach all of my Apple log shooting, which I think comes out pretty well. So I hope you found this video useful. Stay tuned for more videos that are going to be useful. Hit subscribe and all that. The editing app, I did not forget. Shut up. I know you're thinking, hey, Max, you totally forgot about the editing app, but I totally didn't. It's still coming. In fact, I'm working on a video about it right now. That's a lie. I'm going to start working on it tomorrow, but it has been shot. There's updates about the editing app, and more cool stuff coming soon. There's going to be more DIY projects, going to be more shooting tutorials, and some gear reviews. That is not something that I thought I would ever do, but there's stuff that I really need to talk about. So stay tuned, hit subscribe. Thank you for watching, and remember, man, I'm running out of things to say here. I think I need to retire this joke.